This is Greg Fowler for Online London. I'm with Joe Fontana, who's a candidate for mayor in the City of London. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
If elected, how many hours per week on average would you expect to have to spend working in your elected capacity?
Well, I've been in politics for 28 years, and I know it's a job that is 7 days a week. And so I would imagine I would probably be at least 80 to 100 hours.
Do you think ward councillors are currently paid enough for the amount of work that they'll be doing during the next term of City Council?
Yes.
London's governance model is undergoing significant change, which you well know includes elimination of the Board of Control. Do you think that this will increase the necessity for ward councillors to inform themselves about issues outside of their own ward boundaries?
Well, I hope so. Having been both a councillor and a Board of Control member in the past, 80% of everything that City Council does does not necessarily relate to one's ward. But I think in the absence of a Board of Control, I think that the big picture, the citywide issues will become a lot more important and much more focused, and therefore I would hope that it just isn't about what's important for my ward, as they might put it, but essentially what's also good for the city as a whole.
Do you live within the geographical boundaries of the electoral area in which you are contesting the election?
I don't live here, but I own property here and have paid property taxes, business taxes for over 40 years.
How many of your post-teenage years have you lived in London?
I've been here 40 years.
Have you attended any standing committee meetings over the last 4 years?
Yes.
Any Board of Control meetings?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Municipal Act and the Municipal Councillor's Guide?
Of course.
Strengthening Neighbourhoods is a citizen task force which has recommended development of a neighbourhood matching fund type program for large and small community projects other than celebrations or events. Do you support that recommendation?
Absolutely. And I think we've got a unique opportunity in terms of looking at neighborhoods, and I've had opportunity to discuss with both the public and separate school boards the opportunity of sharing facilities, of working much closer together. I know there's been some discussions, but from what I understand, never anything in terms of a formal way. So I think that because those assets, in those neighborhoods, are sometimes underutilized, I think that that's what we ought to work towards.
What maximum per project amount do you think the city ought to contribute?
Well, it's hard to say because every neighborhood is a little different, but I think there's no doubt that depending on the needs, depending on what the neighborhood itself brings to the table in terms of the matching funds, but I think we ought to have a particular formula. I haven't given it any thought in terms of a maximum. I think it all depends on need.
Do you support development of a community program to fund the creation of public art in public places?
Yes.
Should the city and its boards and commissions embrace the concept of making their data open and accessible to everyone as often as is possible and adopting open standards for that data?
Absolutely. Total accountability not only for boards and commissions, but I've been surprised at how much there's a lack of openness and transparency and accountability at City Hall itself.
When existing software applications have to be replaced or when software licenses have to be renewed, should the city adopt the use of open source software whenever that's possible?
Why not?
Is the city's communication department being given enough resources, money, and personnel to properly maintain the city website and to inform citizens in a timely fashion?
Well, I've indicated that I want to review all staff resources in every department, but there's no doubt that communications is essential. I've talked about communicating in using new technology such as the one that we're using today, not only at committee meetings, at council meetings, and any other meetings, boards of commission. I think the public is demanding openness, accountability, and transparency, and I'm sure that we need to make sure that not only through the communications department, but making sure that we're using every technology available to open up the system totally.
Do you think citizens ought to be able to subscribe to subject-specific RSS feeds from City Hall in order to stay informed?
Yes.
Should citizens be able to download the agendas of upcoming public meetings, including advisory committee meetings, at least a week in advance?
At least a week, if not more.
Despite the requirement of the Municipal Act that all City Hall meetings be public except for specific reasons, it's been argued that they most often are not because of the inability of the public to hear what's being said. Do you support the adoption of a policy which mandates the use of microphones in all public meetings at City Hall?
Absolutely. I've been there many times and you can hardly hear what's going on, but I understand the renovations may take care of that. But I think there's no doubt if you can't hear it, you can't understand it, and therefore you can't be informed about it. So absolutely.
Do you think the city ought to be webcasting all of its public meetings?
Absolutely.
Should boards and commissions be webcasting all of their public meetings?
Absolutely.
Should the chairpersons of public meetings at City Hall ought to have to announce motions and amendments to those motions and the number of votes for and against those motions so that the public can understand what's taking place?
Absolutely.
Should London hire an Auditor General?
Yes.
Should homeowners have to pay a percentage of the cost for the repair of damage to underground infrastructure on their own property that has been caused by city-owned trees?
Well, if it's caused by city-owned trees, absolutely not.
Do you agree with the placemaking concept of neighborhood gateways?
Yes.
Should there be increased user representation on the London Transit Commission?
Yes.
If the City of London is going to provide venture capital to businesses, should the city be guaranteed a return on its investment in the event that those businesses become profitable?
Of course, I think that we ought to maximize our investments totally, but one should realize that there are direct benefits and there are indirect benefits by virtue of any city investment. I'm very much for more private-public partnerships in things that we can do, from capital to and operating for certain ventures and certain things that the city might want to do. But yes, we need to ensure that the taxpayer is not only protected, but has a reasonable return on that investment.
Should people be allowed to naturalize their lawns?
I've got to give that some more thought.
Are London's pedestrians and pedestrian issues sufficiently represented at City Hall?
No, I think we've got to do a lot better job in the context of a total transportation study that not only looks at bicycles, but looks at public transit, but looks at pedestrians and looks at obviously vehicle traffic, in order to make sure that we are as safe as we possibly can, and that the pedestrians also have certain rights, obviously, but their safety is of primary concern to me, of course.
The traffic and parking bylaw prohibits people from using any sidewalk for any purpose other than pedestrian traffic except as specifically permitted. Should downtown patios, which consume most of the width of the public sidewalk, be permitted?
No.
When closure of a public sidewalk for construction purposes takes place, what steps should be required to ensure that pedestrians are not forced out onto the roadway in a manner which puts them at risk?
Well, obviously, in terms of proper planning, when that kind of work is being done, obviously pedestrian access, especially to those streets, neighborhoods, and homeowners or renters, needs to be taken into account. And therefore, you can't force people on the road. Surely, we can design a system or plan a system that would allow for pedestrians to access in the safest possible way their homes.
Is the warranted sidewalk program sufficiently funded?
I'd want to take a look at that. There's no doubt that where in fact the homeowner wants to essentially have a sidewalk in front of their place and are prepared to pay for some of that work, then obviously we ought to facilitate that as quickly as we possibly can and not take that long. But I'd have to review the total budget.
Is the warranted walkway program sufficiently funded?
Same answer.
Old unlit streets are not lit unless there's a local improvement program application and a cost-sharing agreement amongst owners. Do you agree with that policy?
No, I think that the city needs to look at our responsibility to make sure that the streets are well lit. And I think in the overall context of how we can achieve that, one needs to look at all of those new technologies in lighting that's available. In fact, private sector, in my opinion, can come, save all kinds of money to the city, and perhaps part of the that mandate or part of the expression of interest that I would initiate would be to light up those unlit walkways or roadways.
Do you think special funding ought to be provided to London Police for the purchase of additional speed watch radar trailers and the cost of having the auxiliary police unit deploy them on a frequent basis?
I've had discussions. I think we ought to use technology in a much better way with regards to making sure that our intersections and our streets are safer. Now, whether or not that's red light cameras or whether or not it's speed or radar technology, I think we ought to look at that. And from what I understand, the police have been asking for some of this for quite some time, but unfortunately have never been given the okay in terms of the capital expenditure.
Should the city spend as much as it is per year from the federal gas tax to construct on-road bike lanes in London?
Yes. I think that that's part of what the gas tax might. What I don't agree with is using the gas tax to fund private sector or fund private sector initiatives.
Should bicycles be allowed on public sidewalks?
I think that there's a way that, yes, of course, that I think that should be considered.
Should motorized wheelchairs and other mobility devices that are on the public sidewalk be obliged to yield for pedestrians?
Obliged to yield? Well, I think that the reverse might be true. I think it's fair to say that the people who are using motorized vehicles for the purposes because they are disabled or challenged in some way, shape, or form, that the pedestrian ought to yield right of way to them.
Should the city install more bike racks?
On our buses, I take it? Bicycle racks? Yes, of course. I think part of promoting a good environmental policy, a good transportation policy is to make it that much easier for people who choose to want to use their bicycles. Obviously, having bicycle racks is part of that solution.
Is the theft of bikes an important issue?
Well, it's a police matter.
Is the City of London currently spending enough money to promote its web-based ride match service?
They better, because I don't know anything about it.
Should there be dedicated and discounted carpool parking spaces on downtown streets and in city-owned lots?
I think we ought to look at that, obviously, as a solution.
Should every signalized London intersection provide advanced left turns?
Yes, and longer, because what I hear constantly is, one, there's not enough left-hand turning lanes or storage, and more importantly, that the left-hand advanced greens are not long enough to facilitate. And I think we have to do a total better job in our whole movement of traffic, including the synchronization of lanes.
Does the City of London currently provide sufficient funding for the Community Gardens program?
I think we can always do more to beautify our city.
Should dogs be muzzled when they're not on their owner's property?
Yes.
Should dogs be allowed at community events?
I don't see why not.
Do you think people ought to be allowed to raise chickens in their backyards?
No.
That's the end of the interview. Thanks for your cooperation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.